Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and today's continuation of the What's Next series covers the Minnesota Timberwolves. After breaking a long playoff drought last season, things didn't go nearly as well this year for this team. It started in the offseason when Jimmy Butler decided he no longer wanted to be in Minnesota, but then played in 10 games for the team anyway before being moved to the 76ers. They got an okay return for him considering his issues and at least moved on from all the drama that he brought with him, but now they're in an interesting spot. They certainly have some talent, as I'll talk about in a second, but they'll have to make a lot of the correct decisions over the next few years to really become anything noteworthy in the Western Conference. Let's begin by talking about some building blocks for this team. First is obviously Karl-Anthony Towns, who returned to the form he showed in his second season once Butler was traded away this year, rather than the watered-down version of himself that too often showed up last year. There are still improvements to be made. He still needs work as a defender. He needs to be slightly more efficient from the floor and lower his turnover numbers, but overall, he's a really great foundation to build around. Finding big guys that can average 20 and 10 while also shooting 40% from three is exceedingly difficult and makes him an extremely rare player, and he is still just 23 years old. The biggest issue moving forward will be making sure that his immense talent starts translating into wins relatively soon, which will be equal parts on him continuing to grow as a player, but also on the front office for properly building around him. Next up is Andrew Wiggins, and really you guys kind of know the story with him at this point. I kind of feel like I have to put him in this section because of his age, and he is still a talented player, but it's getting to the point where I'm wondering if he's getting the opportunities that he is offensively out of necessity because of a lack of perimeter talent on this team, and the hope that at some point he'll live up to the potential of a former number 1 overall pick and max contract rookie extension player. But unfortunately, there weren't many signs this year that he's getting any closer to that goal. His field goal percentage decreased for the third consecutive season. He still isn't a reliable three-point shooter, continued his struggles with getting to the free throw line that came about last year, and isn't a good enough defender or playmaker to make up for the holes in his game at the moment. On top of that, as we all know, he is set to start a 5-year max rookie extension contract next season that pays him between $25 and $33 million a year for the next 5 years. And as I'll talk about later on, if he doesn't develop into a really good player during this contract, it's going to be a huge hindrance to this team. Next is Robert Covington, who the team acquired in the Butler trade, and he continued to be the exact same player in Minnesota that he was in Philly. A solid, high-volume three-point shooter that plays hard and provides good to great perimeter defense and not much else. Now, that is a great player to have on the roster for a team that's competing for top playoff seeds and potentially championships, but I'm not sure that he really helps the Timberwolves all that much in their current situation. Barring something crazy, they're not going to be a playoff team in the near future, which kind of inverts his value to them. He's locked up on a team-friendly contract long-term, paying him between $10 to $12 million a year for the next few years, but they might be better served using that value in a trade potentially. And ideally, that would be to acquire players that better fit their timeline. He turns 29 in December, and although his game should age relatively well, I just don't know how valuable it is to have such a high-level complementary option on a team without a lot of high-end talent to complement. Moving on now to the other piece of the Jimmy Butler trade, Dario Saric. He was a player that when he was moved to the Timberwolves, I was really excited about it for him personally. As a draft prospect, he showed a lot of individual playmaking skill in the front court that he never really got to utilize in Philly, and I was really hoping that that was going to be unlocked a bit in Minnesota, but unfortunately, he had an awful start to the season with the Sixers and just never really recovered the rest of the way. He received his lowest minutes per game across any stretch of his career during the 68 games he played with the Timberwolves, and although his three-point shooting numbers recovered after a rough start, he wasn't really utilized for much else. Maybe there are other reasons for this that I'm not seeing, but I'm still holding out hope that they're going to at least try and see what they have in Saric in advance of him hitting restricted free agency in 2020. I'm not saying that he's guaranteed to become a poor man's Nikola Jokic or anything, but with a team that's going to need any kind of young talent it can find, I find it strange that they didn't invest more in figuring out the potential long-term value of Saric this season. And last up in this section is Josh Okogie, a rookie that certainly has flaws in his game, but is such a great athlete and plays so hard that it makes it easy to look past them and see a potentially promising future for him. The per-game averages and the shooting numbers aren't great at all, I'll admit that, but if he can just put in the time to become a more consistent shooter, he should be a good long-term piece for this team on the wing. I wouldn't anticipate any kind of crazy development from him, but his game could eventually resemble Covington's later in his career, with the added benefit of being on the same timeline as the other young players on the roster. Okay, with that covered, let's move on to the draft. The Timberwolves hold the 11th pick in this year's draft and could really go in any direction that they want to at the guard spots or on the wings. As you could tell by the building blocks section, there isn't a ton of promising young talent on this team in terms of perimeter scores, so that would be a good place to start when targeting prospects in this draft. The hope would be that a player like Kobe White or Romeo Langford fall to them to give them a boost of athletic scoring and playmaking in the backcourt before what will probably be a run on big guys such as Jackson Hayes, Bol Bol, and Brandon Clark. If that doesn't happen, I'd be surprised to see them trade down a few spots to get someone like Kevin Porter or Tyler Hero, but regardless of the circumstance, I'd be surprised if they don't come out of this draft with either a guard or a wing player. Moving on now, let's look at the Timberwolves free agency and payroll situation. As of right now, with Jeff Teague having officially opted into his contract for next season, they're sitting right at the salary cap of $109 million, and they don't really have any options to try and maneuver themselves under the cap this summer, so their flexibility is limited. The reasons for this are numerous. I've already talked about the disaster that is Andrew Wiggins' contract, but this team is also, for some reason, paying Gorgui Dieng over $30 million combined over the next 2 seasons. The Covington contract is also on there, though that isn't a bad deal in itself. And lastly, and arguably the biggest misstep of this entire thing, they completely wasted the 4 years of Karl Anthony Towns playing at an all-star level while on his rookie contract. He's been an absolute star basically right away, and they failed to capitalize on the single biggest advantage of acquiring great young players through the draft, the rookie wage scale. Remember back when they had Towns, Wiggins, Zach LaVine, and even Chris Dunn with some cap space as well? That was what a rebuilding team was supposed to look like, even if all of the players haven't developed perfectly to this point. They completely misread their timeline for competing for a top 4 seed in the West by trading for Jimmy Butler, and that mistake resulted in a huge loss of value after they traded him to the Sixers, and now here they are years later, and Towns is set to start a max rookie extension contract that will pay him between $27 and $35 million a year for the next 5 years. They had every opportunity to build a long-term playoff team during the first 4 years of Towns' career, and they simply spoiled it, and now they'll be playing catch-up. They'll have to wait until next offseason for Teague's contract to come off the books to create about $15 million in cap space, and then the following Dieng's will come off as well to create a little bit more flexibility. But they also have to consider what it will cost to bring back Saric in 2020 free agency as well when evaluating what kind of future flexibility they will have. Realistically, this is going to be an uphill climb to try and create a great team. It'll take some great drafting and front office moves, and if they can somehow find a way to dump Andrew Wiggins' contract or help him develop more as a player, that would be a huge plus. And honestly, that's what I keep coming back to for this team, that Wiggins is the key to all of this. If they just didn't have his contracts on the books, or if he had become a better player, they'd be in a lot better spot right now to continue to build through the draft and around Towns. But now they're hoping for 2 unlikely events, finding a trade partner for Wiggins or him suddenly becoming worth the money he's being paid, to be a highly competitive team anytime in the next 3 to 4 years. In the end, for the Timberwolves, I wish I had a better evaluation of their prospects moving forward. This is a franchise that has had a really tough time building anything sustainable and only just recently broke into the playoffs for the first time in their history without Kevin Garnett on the roster, only to come back down to the lottery this year. But unfortunately for them, they just haven't figured out a way to put together anything meaningful, and their past mistakes make it difficult to find a way to do that in the future either. Who knows, maybe their new coaching staff, led by head coach Ryan Saunders, will find a way to unlock the games of Wiggins and Saric and Okogie and get even more out of Towns, and they'll make the correct decisions in the draft and free agency to create something great with Towns as the focal point. But that's a lot of things that have to go their way for that to happen. In all likelihood, what will actually happen is that they'll continue to struggle to climb their way out of Western Conference mediocrity for the next few seasons, a position that this team and this fan base have become all too familiar with over the years. And there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.